Concern over what's to come at the southern border and criticism of his administration's handling of the migrant crisis comes just as President Biden is launching his new bid for the White House. According to new poll numbers, he is facing an uphill climb if he wants another 4 years in office. A Washington Post ABC poll is showing only 36% of Americans approve of President Biden's job so far. 56% of Americans disapprove, and that includes 47% who say that they strongly disapprove. Kristal Knight is joining us now live. She's a Democratic strategist and former political director for Priorities USA. Kristal, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely.
So, Kristal, according to Gallup, only 2 incumbent presidents looking for re-election had approval ratings lower than Biden does right now. And that was George H.W. Bush in 1992 and then Jimmy Carter back in 1980. So what are you thinking right now when it comes to President Biden's approval ratings? Do you think that he can beat the odds? How concerning are these numbers?
Well, I think we have to recognize that these numbers are real and they are concerning, but we also have to recognize where we are. Today is May the 8th. 2023. So we're more than a year out from this election. And so looking at the poll numbers right now, quite frankly, they don't matter, because what we know is that Americans' opinions and their attitudes about the 2024 election, they will change as we get closer and closer to next year. I think once we get into January and March of next year, if the president's numbers are still at this low approval rating, that's something that, his campaign will have to try to adjust and figure out what's the message that's either not resonating or that needs to resonate with Americans across this country to make sure that they begin turning out in numbers to re-elect him for his November re-election bid.
Let me ask you that question. I'd love to turn that around and ask you, what do you think isn't resonating? What do you think is behind the low approval ratings?
Well, I think, the low approval ratings are a combination of things that have happened, quite frankly, they haven't gone well over this administration. So we can go back to the very beginning with the Afghanistan pullout. We can go to, things that are happening around student loan forgiveness. Although the president made this, a campaign promise, he is attempting to deliver on it, but ultimately he hasn't. So those are things that I think people think about. I think some of the things that have begun to resonate, we've seen the cost of insulin drop. That's something that many Americans in this country rely on. The president has championed paid family leave. That's another thing that many Americans desire and need for their personal livelihoods. But the other thing is Roe versus Wade. That's something that has hurt a lot of women across this country. And while the vice president has been out on the trail championing it, and it's been successful in a few states, it's still something that has not resonated, unfortunately, across many of our states. I think the big thing right now, if I were, just being a strategist and looking at what's happening, is gun reform. We're continuing to live in tyranny in this country because of guns. And that's not something that is the fault of President Biden, but it's the inaction of our Congress members to really enact policies that would keep children and people safe wherever they choose to live, work, or play. And that's something that likely has many Americans down.
And you're right, because this is all coming off the heels of an extremely violent weekend in this country. But the president did sign an executive order when it comes to gun reform. Does it go far enough?
I don't think that it goes far enough. I mean, I'm from Tennessee. We have a permitless carry. Looking at what happened in Texas over the weekend, again, easy access. Anyone can have a gun. The laws in the states are what matter. And, it's not to say that the president cannot do anything with executive orders or the power of his office, but ultimately, this is a gubernatorial issue across a number of different states. And I think we're just at a point where Americans are becoming desensitized to violence because we see so much of it. It's dominating the news every single day. It's happening not only in our urban cores across this country, but in many, rural areas as well. And so, again, I think that there's a lot more that we can do and push for with our elected officials, because we're in a state of emergency constantly because of guns.
I want to switch gears right here and talk about the economy for a second, because the president was going to be meeting yet again with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy when it comes to the debt ceiling. How do you think Americans feel the president is doing when it comes to the economy?
Well, I mean, we also know that people think about the economy when they think about voting. How has my personal economic situation either changed in the better or the worse? And inflation is still high. I think the cost of gas has gone down, the cost of eggs and groceries have gone down. But when we see the Fed continue to raise interest rates, that's something that will affect every single American. If you're in the position where you're thinking about purchasing a home or you're thinking about purchasing a car or some big ticket item and interest rates are through the roof, those are things that really hinder your ability to have forward progress economically as you personally see fit. And so when I think about where the economy is today and where it's been, quite frankly, over the last 18 months, we have not been in a prosperous economic situation. We're seeing things just cost much higher than they should. And I think that that affects, again, Americans' attitudes when we see these poll numbers, when they're going to, when they're thinking about going to the polls next year, it will absolutely affect this election.
And I hear what you're saying, because inflation has been high, and I know that the Fed has been working to tamp that down. But it's not the inflation that the U.S. saw in the 70s and the 80s when there was double-digit inflation, if you will. The U.S. is still moving out of a pandemic, which was just declared over just last week. So my question to you is, what about jobs? Because unemployment is at a historic low. It's at 3.4%. That's a 53-year low.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And my thoughts are, this job market is really in the hands of the employee. Employers are having to do lots of things, meaning they're having to raise wages, they're having to offer bonuses, signing bonuses, and people are still leaving jobs. If we look across the service industry right now, there's a high number of turnover because people have a lot of options. I think the pandemic, while it spurred entrepreneurship, it also allowed people the ability to tell jobs, I don't want to come into your office. I don't want to come into a work or corporate setting. So when we think about job creation, and while jobs can slightly tick up, I think that the employees really have the hold on the job industry right now, and that they're able to dictate how employers are able to really create the environments that will bring workers back in. The president has championed making sure that factories and people who are creating things, have American-made goods. And I think that that's a great thing for our economy. Obviously, the infrastructure, act, making sure people are able to work on roads and bridges. But ultimately, this is an employee challenge that I think many employers are having to figure out what is the right, what's the right combination to make sure that retention is high, because right now it doesn't appear that, job creation and everything that's happening is really in the employer, playbook. It's more so on the employee.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot right now on the president's plate, but you're right. I mean, it's still 2023, so we've got some time, right? Got some time until the 24 elections. All right, Democratic strategist Kristal Knight, thank you so much for stopping by and having this conversation with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.